Welcome to Relyence training on using the Relyence API. In this video, we'll cover using the Relyence API to read and write data from Relyence. We're going to use the drone example provided by Relyence to show how to add a new fracas problem using the Relyence API. To start, we are signed into Relyence and viewing the Welcome dialog. If you do not have this open, click the Help drop-down on the top right of your screen and click Welcome to Relyence. In the Welcome dialog, make sure that fracas is selected using the module selectors on the left. We will be using the drone example in this tutorial, so we will click Open Example Analysis. Now, our analysis is created that we will access through the API. I have already downloaded the Relyence API SDK from the Relyence website, which is a C# library written to access data in Relyence. The Relyence API SDK solution comes with the SDK project, a testing project filled with code examples, and a completed copy of this tutorial project that we are going to walk through. The download link for the Relyence API SDK is provided in the description area of this video. Now, we are going to create a complete new project in Visual Studio that uses the Relyence API. Let's go to Visual Studio and click File, New, Project. On the left, let's select Templates, Visual C#, Windows, and then click Windows Forms Application on the right. Let's name our new project Relyence API Tutorial and click OK. Now, Visual Studio will create an empty project for us with a simple Windows form. Before we start coding, we have a few setup steps. First, let's make sure that our new project is the startup project. In the Solution Explorer, right-click on the Relyence API Tutorial project and select Set as Startup Project. Next, let's add a button to our form to execute our code. Select View Toolbox and then select Common Controls to find the button control. Let's drag a button onto our form and then right-click on this button, select Properties, and rename it to Run Test. Last, we have to add the Relyence API SDK project to this solution to access the functions to manipulate Relyence data. To do this, make sure that you have the Relyence API SDK downloaded and unzipped from the link in the description for this video. Then, click File, Add, Existing Project. In this window, find the Relyence API SDK project and then click Open. If you are prompted with a security warning, click OK. This project contains references to many NuGet packages that you may or may not have installed on your system. To ensure that you have all necessary packages, select Tools, NuGet Package Manager Console, and then type the following command into the Package Manager console. Then hit Enter. Now, we're ready to start adding code. For this tutorial, we're going to put all of our code in the button click handler. To do this, we will double-click on the Run Test button. The first section of code we're going to need is the credentials that we're going to use to connect to the Relyence API. I'm going to copy and paste in code stubs for the code we'll need. Let's start with some variables to hold our credentials. The first variable we have here is the API key. You will get your API key from Relyence, so let's jump back over to Relyence to show how this is done. First, we open the Account drop-down menu and select My Modules. In the My Relyence Modules window, click the API Key button. We are now looking at the Manage API Key window. If you have never generated an API key before, click the Generate API Key to do so. If you already have an API key, use that one. If you create a new key, any software using the old key will stop working. Now, select this key and copy it to the clipboard. Now that I have the key, we'll switch back over to Visual Studio and put that key in our code. I'll now fill in my username, which is my email address, and my password too. Version and website will be left blank for our tutorial here, but you would fill those in if you were using a newer version of the Relyence API, or if your company is using an on-premise install of Relyence where you would need to provide a website address override. Next, we'll create an instance of the Relyence API class and initialize a connection to the Relyence server. You can see the red line under Relyence API. Our tutorial project doesn't know about the Relyence API SDK yet, so we need to connect it. The first thing you will need to do is add a reference to the SDK in our tutorial project. To do this, right-click on the References section of the tutorial project and click Add Reference. In the Reference Manager window, select Projects and then select Relyence API SDK, then click the OK button. Next, we need to add a using clause for the Relyence API SDK so our code knows which library contains the Relyence API class. At the top of this file, let's add using Relyence API SDK. The goal of this tutorial is to insert a new fracas problem record into the drone example analysis. In order to use the drone example analysis, we need to get its Relyence database ID. To do this, we will have to query the Relyence system using the API. Let's add some code to query for the ID of this analysis and put it inside of the if statement that initializes the connection to Relyence. Now, we'll fill in the name of our analysis. We're using the drone example. Note the red line starting at await. We are trying to call an asynchronous method from within a synchronous function, so we will also have to make our button click handler function asynchronous. The function getAnalysisID will retrieve the Relyence database ID for drone example. The results from this function call will be returned into the variable result.json as a JSON formatted string. There are many C# libraries that can easily convert JSON data into a more readable and reusable class, so let's do that now. You can see that we've deserialized the JSON data into a new class called Analysis. It will be much easier to see and use this data now. Note the red lines under Analysis and JSON Convert. We are again using code that Visual Studio doesn't know about. To remove the red line under Analysis, we'll copy and paste in some classes that I created earlier for an analysis, subsystem, and problem outside of the Form1 class. Feel free to reuse these classes in any projects that you make. You can easily add more members to the classes if you need to pull back more field data from Relyence than what we are doing in this tutorial. To remove the red line under JSON Convert, we need to add a using clause for newtonsoft.json. If you have not used the newtonsoft.json library before, you will need to use the NuGet Packager Manager to download it. To do this, select Tools, NuGet Package Manager, Package Manager Console, then type the following command. Then hit Enter. Now, close the tab that Visual Studio has automatically opened. After this package has installed, add using newtonsoft.json to the top of the file. Now that we have the database ID for the drone example analysis, we'll get a list of all the subsystems in the analysis so we can associate our new problem with an existing subsystem already in the analysis. The new function here, getSubsystems, will return a list of subsystems in the analysis. Since we're guaranteed to have at least one subsystem in an analysis file, we can safely just get the Relyence database ID of the first subsystem in the list. Now, we're ready to enter our new fracas problem into Relyence. To do this, we need to define a dictionary and fill it with the data we want to populate in our new record. Next comes a code to do the actual insert. Looking at the insert problem method, you can see that we are passing our earlier results as the parameters to this method. We are not associating this problem with an existing Fracas incident record, so we will pass a 0 for the incident database ID. Also, for John Smith to be added into the team members field, he must be a user in Relyence. If we were to look at the return problem record, we would see that the ID, problem ID, and results log fields were filled in. You will use the ID of this record for additional reads and updates to this same record. We'll look at these values later when we actually run the code. Next, let's add some code to retrieve this record from Relyence and show that it was added. Here, we fill in the fields list with the list of fields that we want to retrieve for this problem. The field names that you would use are the same field names that you would see in your tables or forms in Relyence. We will use the getProblems method along with our earlier results as parameters to retrieve this problem record. Let's do a quick test now to confirm that this all works. I'll add a few breakpoints in our code so we can see the objects at each step of the code. Now, let's click Start with Debug selected. Click the Run Test button to start running through our code. At our first breakpoint, we can see that the Analysis ID object is populated with data from Relyence. At our second breakpoint, we can see that the Subsystem ID object is also populated with data from Relyence. At our third breakpoint, we can see that the problem object is populated with data that has been inserted into Relyence. And at our fourth breakpoint, we can see that the problems object has one problem record, which is populated with data that we just retrieved from Relyence. Now, let's jump back over to Relyence and see the new record that we inserted. Let's close the Manage API Key dialog, close the My Relyence Modules dialog, and select Problems in the sidebar. Here, we can see the new problem, Problem 5, in the table. Note that you may have to click the Refresh button in the toolbar to see your newly added record. Thanks for watching. Please visit our website or contact us with any questions and to obtain pricing and purchasing information.